The machines had already gone silent when Aarav Mehta slipped into the hospital room. Outside the tall glass windows, the afternoon sun flooded the white walls with a golden glow, but inside, the air felt heavy, like hope itself had been switched off. The nurses had stopped adjusting the tubes. The doctors had stepped back. The official time of death had been whispered. India's youngest self-made billionaire, the iron-willed business magnate who once commanded boardrooms with a single glance, lay motionless beneath crisp sheets. And yet, a poor single father, with calloused hands and tired eyes, refused to believe it was over. Before this story unfolds, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Deep Night Stories if you believe in kindness, miracles, and second chances. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the smallest acts of love can challenge even death itself. The billionaire's name was Saanvi Rao. At 38, she had built a technology empire from scratch, turning a tiny startup into a global powerhouse. Newspapers called her relentless. Magazines called her untouchable. Investors called her brilliant. But the truth was far quieter. For months, Saanvi had been fighting a rare neurological condition that drained her strength little by little. She had hidden it from the world, attending meetings with a steady smile, while her hands trembled beneath the table. When she finally collapsed during a charity event held under the blazing midday sun, the illusion shattered. She was rushed to the most advanced hospital in Mumbai. Specialists flew in. Experimental treatments were attempted. Every machine money could buy was placed around her bed. But as the days passed, her body stopped responding. On the 7th day, as morning light streamed through the hospital blinds, a team of exhausted doctors stood at the foot of her bed. Her brain activity had flatlined. Her heart faltered, despite the ventilator's rhythm. After hours of effort, they declared her clinically dead. Aarav Mehta was not supposed to be there. He was a janitor assigned to the lower floors, responsible for mopping corridors and emptying trash bins. At 32, his life revolved around survival. His wife had died 5 years earlier during childbirth, leaving him with a son named Vihan. Since then, Aarav's days began before sunrise. He would prepare Vihan's lunch, drop him at a modest government school, and rush to the hospital for his shift. His nights were filled with helping Vihan with homework and telling him stories about bravery, kindness, and hope. Aarav had never met Saanvi personally, but he knew her name. Everyone did. Ironically, the cleaning staff often talked about her generosity. She funded scholarships for children from low-income families. She had once paid for a janitor's daughter's surgery without asking for recognition. Aarav had silently admired her from afar. The day she was declared dead, Aarav had been assigned to clean the ICU waiting area. He saw the flurry of activity, the distressed board members, the hospital administrators whispering urgently. He watched as a sheet was gently pulled up to her chest. Something about the stillness unsettled him. It did not feel final. He did something reckless. He asked the head nurse if he could have a few minutes alone to clean the room before it was sealed for official procedures. The nurse, overwhelmed and emotionally drained, waved him in without much thought. Inside the room, the sunlight poured over Saanvi's face, making her appear peaceful rather than lifeless. Aarav stood at the foot of the bed, clutching his mop handle. He had seen death before. He had watched his wife's eyes close in a dim hospital room years ago. That memory still burned inside him, but this felt different. A hand rested outside the sheet. It was cold, but not stiff. He hesitated, then gently placed his rough palm over hers. He did not speak out loud. He simply thought about Via. He thought about the nights he almost gave up, the mornings he forced himself to stand because his son needed him. He thought about how someone like Saanvi had helped countless families survive their darkest days. And then, with quiet desperation, he whispered a simple prayer in his heart. Hours passed. Official paperwork was delayed because board members argued over public announcements. Hospital staff assumed the body would soon be transferred. Aarav remained. He told himself he was ensuring the room stayed clean, but in truth, he could not leave her alone. As afternoon deepened, exhaustion overcame him. He had worked since dawn. The chair beside her bed looked inviting. He sat down, still holding her hand. The warmth from the sun filtered through the glass, wrapping the room in soft light. Slowly, despite his efforts to stay alert, Aarav drifted into sleep. He slept beside a woman the world had already buried in headlines. Somewhere between the fading afternoon and early evening, something shifted. At first, it was so subtle that it could have been imagined. A faint twitch of her fingers, then a shallow, almost imperceptible breath. The monitors, still connected but muted, flickered faintly. Aarav stirred when he felt the slightest movement against his palm. He opened his eyes, disoriented. For a moment he thought he was dreaming. Then he saw it clearly, the rise and fall of her chest. His heart pounded so loudly he feared it might drown out the fragile rhythm returning to her body. He leaped up, nearly knocking over the chair, and rushed to the door to call for help. Within minutes, doctors flooded the room. Shock painted their faces as they checked her pulse, scanned her brain activity, and adjusted machines that had nearly been turned off. It was impossible, they murmured, medically improbable. A spontaneous return of circulation after prolonged cardiac arrest was almost unheard of, but there it was, a heartbeat. Over the next few days, Saanvi's condition stabilized. She remained unconscious, but her body responded to treatment in ways it hadn't before. News spread rapidly. The media called it a miracle. Social media exploded with theories. Medical journals requested data. Aarav tried to fade back into invisibility. He returned to mopping floors, avoiding reporters, but someone had noticed his name in the room log. Security footage showed he had been inside when the monitors first flickered back to life. Hospital administrators summoned him. He stood awkwardly in a crisp, borrowed shirt, feeling painfully out of place in the conference room filled with executives. They asked what he had done. He had no answer that sounded impressive. He told them he had simply stayed. He had held her hand. He had fallen asleep. Some of them looked skeptical. Others looked moved. When Saanvi finally opened her eyes a week later, the world outside her hospital window was bright with mid-morning sun. Her first clear memory was warmth, not machines, not pain, warmth, as if someone had anchored her to life. Recovery was slow. She had to relearn how to stand without dizziness. Physical therapy sessions were grueling. Her once razor-sharp mind struggled through moments of fog, but she was alive, and she asked a question no one expected. Who was in the room with me? Doctors tried to dismiss it as confusion, but she insisted. She remembered a presence, a steady, comforting weight, holding her back from darkness. Eventually, someone mentioned Aarav. When they brought him to her room weeks later, he stood near the doorway, hesitant and humble. Saanvi studied his face. He looked nothing like the polished executive she was used to. His uniform was simple. His posture carried quiet fatigue, but his eyes were kind. She did not remember details, yet she felt certain. He was the warmth. Over the following months, as she continued her recovery under bright daylight, therapy sessions, and supervised walks in the hospital garden, Saanvi requested to hear more about his life. She learned about Vihan, about the early mornings and late nights, about the sacrifices stitched into every day of Aarav existence. For Aarav, accepting her interest was difficult. pride battled with need. He did not want charity. He did not want charity. He did not want headlines painting him as a hero. But Saanvi did not offer charity. She offered opportunity. She created a foundation branch dedicated to hospital support staff, education grants, healthcare benefits, financial planning assistance. Aarav was invited to help design the program, so it reflected real struggles rather than corporate assumptions. At first, he declined public recognition, yet as he watched nurses and cleaners receive support that could transform their families' futures, he understood that sometimes stepping into light helps others step out of shadows. Vihan's life changed too. He received a scholarship to attend a better school, not because his father had saved a billionaire, but because Saanvi believed no child's potential should depend on income. The greatest transformation, however, was internal. Saanvi, who once measured success in stock prices and expansion charts, began measuring it in impact. Surviving death stripped away illusions. She spent after noons visiting pediatric wards, sitting beside children whose families could not afford prolonged treatment. She no longer rushed through charity events. She listened. Aarav, who once felt invisible in a city of millions, discovered that dignity does not require wealth. It requires courage to care. Years later, on a warm afternoon filled with golden light, Saanvi stood at the inauguration of a new community medical center funded entirely by her foundation. Aarav Mehta stood beside her, not as a janitor this time, but as director of community outreach. Cameras flashed. Speeches were delivered. But what mattered most was the quiet understanding between them. Neither of them had planned that day in the ICU. Neither of them could explain it scientifically. But they both knew something simple and powerful. Sometimes, when the world gives up, all it takes is one human being refusing to walk away. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like, share, and let others experience it too. Your engagement helps stories of hope reach people who might desperately need them. There is one more part that rarely makes headlines. Aarav never considered himself the reason Saanvi survived. He believed she fought her own way back, and Saanvi never believed she owed her life to him. She believed love, in any form, is a force that multiplies when shared. On the anniversary of her recovery, they visited the hospital room together. The same windows, the same afternoon sunlight. This time, laughter replaced silence. Bihan ran around the room, fascinated by the beeping machines. Aarav looked at the chair where he had fallen asleep years before. He realized something profound. That day, he had not saved a billionaire. He had simply stayed with another human being in her loneliest hour. And perhaps that is the real miracle. Before we close, I have a special request. Comment the word hope below if you believe that even in the brightest daylight, miracles can quietly unfold. The world often celebrates power, money, and status. But this story reminds us that compassion carries a strength no fortune can purchase. A poor single father with nothing but faith and tired hands changed the trajectory of countless lives, not through wealth, but through presence. As the sun set that evening, casting warm orange light over the city skyline, Saanvi watched families walk into the new medical center without fear of unaffordable bills. Aarav walked beside his son, who now dreamed of becoming a doctor. Their lives were forever intertwined by a single afternoon when hope refused to die. And somewhere deep within the rhythm of a once silent heart, a truth echoed softly. Sometimes the greatest resurrections begin with the simplest act of staying. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of kindness or the possibility of second chances, please engage with the video and share your thoughts. Your support keeps these heartfelt stories alive. Because in the end, miracles are not always loud. Sometimes they happen quietly in sunlit rooms, when one ordinary person chooses not to give up.